Everyone. We're just going live on Instagram, just like you're used to me doing. I can't wait to talk to this one of my favorite humans. I know I say this, but I have a few favorite humans, and Zita, you're one of my new few favorite humans. Ha ha! I get to have time with you. This is so great.
I
So
know.
I'm going to brag about you first. The first time, so we met online, and then I flew to London to meet you. And I got to tell you, I felt like I regressed and became a 5-year-old girl with you for the day. I felt like we wandered around as two 5-year-old girls. At one point, I looked down and we're holding hands. And I'm like, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. We're walking down the street holding hands. All right. Zita wa Tulia
Tulyahikayo.
Tulyahikayo.
Tulyahikayo. Yeah.
Tulyahikayo.
It's pronounced phonetically,
Yeah,
which is
you just
why it's
gotta
so
you just gotta
easy.
let it roll off the tongue. It's like a German
Yeah,
word. It's just all these letters squished together. It's beautiful.
totally. Even my dad says you still don't know how to pronounce your own name.
Well, so help people locate you as a human in the world and the work that you do in the world.
How do they locate me?
Locate you in the world. Where are all your lands
Oh,
and
okay.
what is the work you do?
So I was born in the United Kingdom. I live in the United Kingdom. I've lived in a few other places, but we'll come to that at another point. My parents met in the north of England. My mother's from Barbados, and my father is from East Africa in Uganda, Rwanda. Before there was a border put between the two, it was sort of like one big clan. And so, yeah, I guess all of my belongings essentially make me sort of a bit East African, Ethiopian, Arab, Welsh, um, Jewish, and Black Caribbean, with a bit of Amerindian somewhere further back in the past.
And I love that you know all these roots because what I was going to tell you is I got a hit on ancestry 30 minutes before this call.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
like, "Oh, I think this is interesting that I'm going to go talk to Zita about ancestral belonging." And I just got this hit. And of
Wow.
course, reconfirmed that I am living on my ancestral land because on my father's line, also 40 minutes from where I'm currently planting my feet. So I was tickled to share that with you.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh my God, that really, that really touches me.
It really touched me too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so empowering when you find it out. I mean, especially when you get the pure version, because with some of these companies, they start to filter it down, and now they're sort of saying, "Oh, I'm 100% African," which would have been great when I was 7 because I had a lot of shame about not being 100% African. But now I'm like, well, the richness is really the fullness. So
Yeah.
that's my geographical and my work, systemic family constellations facilitator, therapist, and coach. So I facilitate the healing of transgenerational trauma in family systems, in organizations, and occasionally I put my toe in the collective waters because the individual is the collective, the family is a microcosm of the bigger. So it's all connected.
So I want to get sort of, I want to hear the why first, and then I want to talk about the how. Why is this important for us to? Why are you touched about my ancestral lands? Why was it meaningful for you to find out more about where you come from? Why is it important for your clients to get in touch with their ancestors?
Well, I think off the top of my head, we know now that genetic information and memories are stored and passed through us. So the the cells that would become me were in my mother when my mother was in my grandmother's womb. So there we've already got a sense of the genetic information of survival and capacity to succeed is being passed through the maternal line, which also therefore includes the paternal line. And it also comes with its secret loyalties to systems. So, I would go trotting off to Wales, hiking in the mountains, and I wouldn't know why I'd feel such this deep sense of peace and safety and just like fullness of this kind of power until I got my genetic test back. And it's like, whatever, that 30% Welsh. And I thought, oh, now that makes sense, right? And and then there was this interesting point because it sort of moves around, and it was I got into a fight with the company because they were saying, oh, you know, your ancestry comes from East Africa, and I was arguing with them, and I took this outrage because my father's East African, my mother's not, and they were going probably by my name. And I told this to my dad, and my dad was like, ah, yes, well, we did sell your mother's ancestors into slavery, and they were from our village. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it was kind of, you know, this whole thing about all of this energy with the story of slavery and how one doesn't know one's roots. So I was like, I now really know where mine are, and they come from the same place that my father came from. So I find that information of getting a sense of where you're from, and then you can go to those places and immerse yourself in the culture and the people, and it's like right back plugging into your ancestral connection and the strength that comes from that, or recognizing, oh, that's why I like polenta, or that's why I like fish that way, or that's why this food is healthier for me. And the sense of restoration from visiting these places, restoring these connections is indescribable. You know,
Interesting.
talking therapy does a lot, but I really think travel does an enormous amount. And we all come from people who constantly migrate,
Totally.
you
Totally. I
know.
mean, I mean, the thing that I learned about my family line is they were all farmers in the vineyards when the French took over that land, and so they all fled to Great Britain. Great Britain said, "We don't want you," so they got on a boat and went to America. And so they were just displaced from their land, and they were farmers, and so they came to the U.S. and settled in Pennsylvania. And
Ah,
I can feel the sort of history here of uh,
right.
oh, okay, I wonder what that experience was like for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How was that to sort of be displaced and, to be moving around and not know where you're going to land?
Absolutely. But even now, you see, you give me that piece of information and it sends a current through my mind because I know that some of the ancestors who left out of Wales and the north of England, William Penn was one of those, which is why the state is called Pennsylvania. And there they met with religious persecuted people out of Germany. And I always say you have a close bond with people who you meet as friends. But usually, if you had the chance to look in the past, you'd find that you were distant relatives. And
Mm.
often we're more genetically closely related to our friends than we are to our actual family members. So now I know why we played like 5-year-olds on our first date.
So we're relatives,
Yeah,
probably.
probably.
I love this. I love this.
Right?
So I want to talk about the how. Like, this is different than talk therapy. So, how exactly is this healing in the room for a client? What does it provide somebody that maybe talk therapy, well, could never provide or is different? I'm not trying to create a hierarchy at all, but I'm just trying to give
Oh,
people a sense of what this is because it's so unusual. My mother in law is a family constellations therapist, so I have some understanding of it, although I still am going to come up and work with you. Um,
I look forward to that. Well, I think what I tend to say to people to describe it in a pedestrian way that is obtainable or achievable is when you're a baby, your mother talks to you all the time, but you don't understand the language of the words she's saying, and she doesn't understand what each muffle or cry means. So you both have to draw upon this muscle called empathy. And she intuits from feelings after a few days, oh, this cry means that cry, that sniffle means that. And so in the air, there is an atmosphere that sends like it does now, hairs up the back of that goes, oh, this is happening, or that something's changed. And that is, I think, our strongest muscle, empathy, our capacity to empathize or feel information in our body, which then gets transmitted into meaning, which we turn into words. We all know it because we go into a party and we say, oh man, this place is buzzing, let's get into it. Or we go, oh, I don't like the vibe, I'm out of here. No one said anything. It's purely a feeling. And a lot of our judgments are made on that frequency. But we can also make estimations or evaluations about experience and understand something through the meaning more powerfully than we can through the words that are spoken. So that's where we're looking at the embodied experience. And so if, as a facilitator, I support clients to set up a living map with people representing their family members, the beautiful thing about it is they will choose people who are running a similar frequency to the particular family member anyway. And then that person will be able to empathize with the person they've been asked to represent. And so in this non-spoken world, they will come to understandings of what that person's experience was and be able to transmit it to the issue holder as, well, this is the part of information that you couldn't see or know because you were perhaps a child, right?
So let me repeat what I think I hear you saying. So somebody in the room, if it's a multi room engagement, will be asked to play a family member from the
Represent, we
past,
say. Yes.
represent a family member, and just by somatically empathizing with that character from the past, they can speak the energy of that, represent the energy of that family member, and speak to the issue holder
Yes.
as that familial generational representative.
Yes.
It's pretty psychic.
I would call it more mediumistic,
Mm-hmm.
that we can tune in or connect to a channel. Because remember, we're working in a very light trance. We're all in trances all the time. Most of my job work is waking people up out of trances that don't really suit them very well and putting them into a better trance, which supports their, growth and learning, if we were to put it that way. So in this trance state, we have access to information that we wouldn't normally have when we're in our normal day-to-day state, high performers or people doing detailed work or surgeons or athletes. And every human being goes in and out of these trance states all the time to access the information to do something really well. But it means tapping into consciousness. We all can do that. And we want to make it some mysterious, magical, hokey thing, but it's not. It really isn't. Our survival has depended on it for thousands of years. And for the first 3 years of our lives, that is the only way we are kept alive, is through this nonverbal language. So it's our first muscle of communication, it's our strongest.
So what I hear you saying is it's not actually hokey. It's actually the more organic, natural way that we do things. We've just defined it as hokey.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're frightened of its power.
Mm-hmm.
And it is powerful. It is powerful. You are someone who's very famous, how it feels when they've got 1 million people projecting energy onto them. It's huge, which is why it has such a powerful effect on them. So we do know it. And that's what's generally astonishing to people when they come to the first time, is it throws them into something that they've always known but never really has been permitted to speak about openly.
Yeah, your comment about famous people made me think of leaders, because even in my limited capacity as leader of Sidewalk Talk, I have received projections and then stepped away from it because I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like walking into a room, having people sort of, even if it's a positive projection, I didn't like those either. I'm like,
Yeah,
where am
it's
I
a
in
lot.
this? How does systemic constellations help people reclaim themselves from all of this muck all around us, whether from other people or from the systems that are sort of imposing all kinds of meanings on us? Can you, I think you've already said it, but maybe you'll say it in a new way
Yeah.
that,
Well, our lives are built around stories. We all tell stories. We communicate through stories all the time. We've got our birth story. We've got the story of our parents' marriage, which we weren't at, but they fell in love. We've been given sound bites of all of these stories, and we construct stories out of what we're experiencing. We mind read all the time to accommodate for an experience that will put us in it in a particular way. Now, Often these stories aren't ideal because they're made up of tiny pieces of information, but not the whole picture. It's the same, actually, the way we see. We only see maybe 30%, and the brain fills in the rest of the information based on an estimation of what should be there, which I think is extraordinary. So it's the same, actually, with our hearing and our seeing perceptions. And what constellations does is it gives you another aspect or two or three or four of the story, so you have a fuller picture. And with the fuller picture, the truth, which was once just your truth, changes. And we naturally have the compassion for the people we love, which is our parents and our family. And once we see, oh gosh, they did that because they were really struggling, not because they didn't like me or didn't want me. Well, that's a completely different story. It's one of strength. And most people generally will take the story of strength because we're coded to survive and go on. And so we need these stories where we become the hero, a little bit the victim, and also the perpetrator. That's a healthy story to hold. If you hold a story where you're predominantly the victim or the perpetrator, well, you can get stuck there and your life will start to stagnate. Your experience will stagnate because you don't have agency to be anything but this singular narrative. And Constellations gives us a fuller narrative of what it really is to be human. And we
Mm.
are all a bit of everything.
Hmm. We're all a little bit victim and perpetrator and hero
Absolutely.
and warrior and
And we're
lover
moving,
and
yeah, and we're moving in and out of these roles all the time, constantly. Even as you walk down the street, a dog walk past, oh, I don't like dogs. Oh, there's the postman. And just thousands of bytes of information. So if you, in essence, tell a story that's incongruent with the reality of your being as a human, well, it's going to have an effect. And it's not a
hmm
very good one. But the
hmm
richer the story is, and you turn it up to full glorious technicolor, the soul just goes, whoa, yeah, I'm alive.
interesting. I'm having a lot of dots are connecting right now. Mm.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know if you asked me this question, but this is naturally where it's going. That's how I came to this work. My life had stopped, it had stagnated, and I was just like in this, it felt like I was confined in this very tight box. I
Mm.
could barely breathe. And all I wanted, I thought the solution to my problem was to have a nice husband. And it
I
took
don't
me
think
on
you're
this
alone in that fantasy.
right. And just actually really focusing in on that question took me through all kinds of interesting adventures, but it eventually, by serendipity and some kind of crazy magic, one might say, to systemic constellations. And it was like coming home. It was like coming home because in my bones, I knew this work. I completely understood it, and I didn't know why I understood it, but I did.
So what were some of the fuller stories that what were some of the wrong stories that changed when you started doing systemic constellations work on yourself? What changed in your fuller picture of yourself? What was the first big one?
The first big one was the first constellation, was the realization that the impact was nothing to do with men, nothing to do with patriarchy, nothing to do with men aren't great and I'm not good enough. Migration. My parents' migration and the separation from origins, and it was on my maternal line, the disconnect, my mother giving birth on her own in England without her close family, mothers, grandmothers, sisters around her, left her feeling frightened and isolated. She was 19. And
Mm.
so she became a frightened and isolated mother who strove and worked really hard to keep her and her child and her family alive. So she worked. And so I didn't have this constant maternal nurturing. I mean, she's a very loving mother, but she was working. And my parents or my father, he also struggled with migration, and it was just too much. So their marriage ended, and I grew up with a father absent. So I spent my whole life looking for my father in other men, which is just not a great way to go. You
But what
meet
I hear
some.
you saying is that you made up a story that it was about patriarchy and oppression and
Well,
blah,
that's what
blah,
I was.
blah.
That's what I was told.
But then
And
when you
all
did
the
the systemic,
newspapers you read and
right.
university, everything tells you that it's these big systems of oppression, that, women struggle because of this, and you don't really process that information. You just go, oh, okay, it must be that, or something's wrong with me. And I was like, I know it's something's not wrong with me. I was kind of quite hot when I was young, so it couldn't be that, right?
You're fishing for a compliment. You still are.
I still am. Yeah, my husband thinks so. Other people do. I'm cool with that. No, but what I was saying, what I mean is that the internal image of the world that I had was of fear, because that was my mother's. She was the one new to England, but England is the land of my birth. It's my motherland. I'm
Mm-hmm.
perfectly comfortable here, and actually, also, I had been living in America, so I was loyal to my family. Had migrated to the States, and you can't just move to another country and expect everything to just go well.
I know
So
nothing
that,
about that.
right? So that was really eye opening for me, and that the facilitator, set up a line of women, from my grandmother, my great grandmother, all these women, and there must have been about 15 women in the workshop. So it was a really long line, all the way back to source. She put it, this is your connection. And she put me as in the front as the little child, and feeling all of those women just sending this cascade of love. I was like, oh my, I can do anything. It was you can't describe the feeling of that flood of love. And so often the flood of love you would have received at birth, but maybe didn't get the full flood, but you don't know that you haven't had it until you get it in this embodied experience. And you don't actually have to do anything more than that. There's no other stories. The shift and the image that remains in my mind of those 15 women standing behind me, sending love and smiling, doesn't matter where they're from or what they look like. That's the truth enacted in a way that my soul understands and goes, yeah. And
Mm.
getting that, having that, receiving that, even the woman facilitating, it's like, wow, you made that possible for me. That's a lot of love to give someone. I mean, I
Mm.
know I paid for it, but still, it's very effective. So it's this. I mean, it's trance. And what happens in a trance state, like when we go to the movies, we know it's not real, but it has an effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is like that, but it is real.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you say is that you could make up a story based on either what psychology tells you you're wounded because your mom didn't nurture you enough. You carry that or you're wounded because you're a woman and you're oppressed, or you're black and you're oppressed. But when you actually do a systemic constellation, you come up with a much fuller picture than the story that you've been holding on to. And then you have access to a lot more power and love, because there's so much power and love in your ancestral line. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived anyway.
Yeah,
And once you get access to that power and love, there's a whole world that opens up to you that has nothing to do with diagnosing yourself with depression.
absolutely.
Am I
Exactly.
am I getting
Yeah,
your
yeah.
okay. That's pretty
So,
cool.
yeah, it's on some other level that even I still don't really understand how to explain it. But the colors of life become brighter. Everything becomes glorious technicolor, and before you realize that you've been living in this subdued world with the volume turned down, everything on mute and slowed down and slightly stifled.
It does really feel like stepping out of the matrix.
Well, it is.
Like you really step out of sort of this combined structure. Like even our attempts at trying to explain how to create unity and how to help us belong to one another still are happening without the full story, right? We're still creating
Yeah,
this systemic understanding that's still based on our narrow understandings of ourselves. And what I hear you
yeah,
saying is now, if you can actually tap into this transgenerational story, you're going to have a much different way of talking about how to create unity in the world and belonging in the world.
yeah. And I mean, I don't want to get too kooky here, but your experience of the world shifts quite dramatically. So I remember about a year after going to my mother's land, Barbados, and my mother wanted me to look at some land with her behind what used to be my grandmother's house. Going out walking there, and my mother just stopped me and she said, "What do you feel?" And I stood there, and all of a sudden it was like, the Kairos time, where past, present, and future are all stacked this way rather than this way. And I could feel I could feel the sounds of the memory of sugarcane and walking through those fields when I was younger, when sugarcane was still growing, and my grandmother and great grandmother used to take me out to cut sugar. But I could hear their voices whispering, but like sweet lullabies of gratitude for re-including them, and
Mm,
it was like I had allowed them to settle now that I had chosen to settle.
mm-hmm,
And that is an indescribable experience, especially if you are from the Caribbean, to change that relationship dynamic with the sugarcane fields,
mm,
and for a different story to be lifted out of them, and know that you have really wholeheartedly, out of purely a selfish thing that you think of wanting to find a partner and create a family, you have actually allowed your ancestors come back in peace, and you can feel that connection and hear them singing their happiness and joy. There's no price for that when you are from a history of oppression and trauma, to be relieved of the sense that their struggle was in vain.
and how does it do that when you hear the sugar canes and you hear the songs and you feel your ancestors, but they may have been enslaved while that all that was going on? How does that lift you? How does that lift you? Because the context might have still been not so good.
Yeah, but what lifts you is you understand that they endured whatever it was because they had a belief, a dream, as all humans do, that one day one of us will not live like this.
Mm. So what you orient towards isn't their oppression, but their strength
Yes,
and their dream and their
yes. And
vision
I
and their
and I am that dream, and I can come back with gratitude, uh, knowing that I fulfilled the dream. But all the other times I would be wandering in circles, being angry about, oh, what happened to them, and that doesn't help them, because of this profound connection, like I'm talking about, the grandmothers and the grandmothers in the womb. Mothers will settle when they know their children are settled,
mm-hmm,
and it doesn't change when they're dead.
mm-hmm.
And that, the recognition and the realization of that, and then looking at my mother and being able to really see her as my mother rather than the woman that I had to help, was huge.
It's like placing her whole story in a much, much larger
Yeah, and
context.
dignifying her and really honoring her. Yeah. And then, of course, the next thing she's like, I want some of this. So I took her to Peru, and we spent 3 weeks in the Sacred Valley at a constellations workshop up there.
No kidding. I didn't know this part.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like the kind of the holy grail in constellations is to go with your mother. And I went with my mother. She came for 3 weeks. And I know how difficult that was for her, because she's had to live in such a kind of guarded way all her life, in a country that wasn't hers. And so she has lots of barriers to kind of protect her and keep her. And she just softened and melted. And she was sitting there in the fields with the Quechua women crocheting. They didn't speak any English. She didn't speak any Quechua, but they all understood each other. And it was, to have these kinds of experiences, it's like, wow, all I asked for was a guy, and I get all this other life experience as a result because of being just open to life. It's like, and not just, another destination, but actually really relating to people in a way that you wouldn't normally, rather than objectifying them as, oh, wow, as a tourist, look at them, they're dressed differently, but really meeting them as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of, I think that you are, I'm on this journey, not looking for a husband, but I think I'm looking for my power.
Mm.
I'm looking for no longer telling my own victim story. And then I meet Zita. I'm like, serendipity. I'm only
No.
reminded of, I did a journey with in my graduate program, it had a lot of woo woo stuff, and I did a shamanic journeying class. So every Wednesday I would do a shamanic journey, which I love that I got university credits for that. But when you and I spoke, it reminded me when I was in London visiting you, and you talked about warriors, and you said, I think you have some warrior in your line. And I only just now, I don't think I told you this then, but when I did one of these journeys, much like when you were in the fields listening to the sugarcane and the songs, I was there and I could hear people calling to me. And I'm like, oh, I come from a people that spread out. Like, we go off on our own. We don't gather. And I've always been longing to gather. But they're like, no, we're always here, but we each live alone. And you had said that to me. You said, I think you come from warriors. Warriors come together when they're in war, but they tend to kind of do
Yeah.
their own thing. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so anyway, I don't want to go too far into my own story, but to just say that that image came up today as I was listening was the memory of that shamanic journey connecting to a previous conversation that you and I had, where I really felt like I heard my ancestors. And yeah, it is really groovy shit. It's just, I hope that we're willing to pick it up, because I see the potential in it. Because right now, even for the folks that I think they're doing cultural repair, I think it's still too narrow of a story as I learn more about systemic constellations.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, I said to my husband, I'm all out of ideas. I don't really know what to say. I haven't written my newsletter in ages. It's like, I don't know what to say. And I said, what I think I'm coming to grips with is that, we can build bridges within our families and within our communities. But because I go out, let's seek to unite. I was like, well, is this a slogan? What does that actually mean? Because maybe we're not supposed to be united. There are plenty of groups who really don't want to be united with anybody else. I come from two of them, and I remember how it is to belong exclusively to that, So I think we can create harmony and peace within our families and constellations. I think that's a really important thing to do because of the individual impact and therefore also the collective impact of the family system and then the wider extended family system. And if you want to, for your children, to give them a very sure, stable ground to land on in life so that they can walk out confidently, then that's a thing to do. But we have so much literally diversity in this world of, no, I don't want to get on with people. Or I want to fight with people. Or I want to accuse people of this. Or I don't want my children to be that confident because they might then go off and become the kinds of people that I say that I don't like. And there's room for all of that. And really the systemic perspective is honoring that everything that exists for a reason. We can't always necessarily see it or understand it. And I have to be mindful of that in my work and also mindful of that in my life. I mean, The number of religions in my family is really hard to keep up with, and honoring all of the diversity of Muslims, Catholics, Quakers, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, atheists, has brought me so much value in appreciating real diversity. And someone says, oh, wearing masks good. Well, for me, masks is something that was slaves. I'm not going to do that. So if one expands that out, we're not going to achieve unity amongst all human beings on earth. It's not going to happen. Belonging doesn't permit it, but we can create exchange, where this group provides this service and this group, but that doesn't mean to say that we're necessarily going to get along. There needs to be a certain amount of it, because marriages means there needs to be enough diversity. But the idea of equity, everybody being equal, we could achieve that. But what does that actually look like? We're not really honest about that. Everybody equal means more war, more rape, more violence, more money, more of everything, including the things that we say that we don't like or don't want. So we haven't necessarily thought that through.
Why do you? I'm not following the thought, so I'm not disagreeing or agreeing. I'm confused. So if we have more equity, more
As in
bad, harmful,
everybody living their full potential, everybody supported well enough to live their full potential, is what I learned.
then there would be more war and rape.
More of everything.
Ah, okay. So what you're saying is it turns up the volume on everything we've already got.
Yeah, yeah,
I see. I get it now.
yeah.
Okay. So if
And not
everybody
everybody's
is got it.
and not everybody is designed to live their full potential. But if we look at these things clearly, well, yeah, we're turning up the volume on everybody, and that is more of everything. It's not bad or worse, but that's what will be.
I'm going to join in the controversial soup with you and say something controversial so you're not the only one saying something. It reminds me of something that happened when I was doing a large group process in Kenya in October. We were talking about suicide, and the facilitator said, this is going to sound creepy for folks it's Mental Health Awareness Month, but they said, some cultures have a different relationship to suicide than Western European cultures. And you have to take a look at that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh. And they
Yeah.
said, sometimes there really are not, I'm going to get skewered for saying this, but whatever. I think what I hear you advocating for is that we can grow. Some of us are called to live in our full potential. But I also hear you advocating for a reality and acceptance of the complexity of the world. I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'll just speak for how it's impacting me. I think you're confronting me on my own high dream for the world. And a high dream is it's good to have a high dream. This is a deep democracy language. But if you only live in the high dream, you can kind of become prey to naivete.
Yes.
And impose that high dream on people and say, we should all get along. And it's like, yeah, but people don't all get along. We harm each other.
And they don't want to all get along.
Yeah. And then
They
that
really
becomes
don't.
oppressive if you try to force people to get along that don't want to get along.
Absolutely. And,
This is going to twist people's brains up. We're going to do
it. Of course it is. But the thing is, my job is, if my job was to think like everybody else, then what's the point of me having my job? My job requires me to think differently, so that when I sit with a client and they're talking about, I can look at things in a different way. And I'm not saying that these things that I'm saying here apply to them, but I can see the picture differently. Otherwise, what's the point? And the high dream is good. I have the high dream every morning. I wake up and I'm like, great, how are we going to bring more peace and love into the world? I mean, everybody in my family thinks I'm nuts. Even, the 15-year-old, and the 15-year-olds are kind of on point in a lot of ways. And, the other day I sat there and I got really real, and there was stuff going on with the news, and I was like, the truth is that we live in a really brutal, harsh world. greatest challenge really that we face as humans is the climate, and it's always been the climate. Humans have always been freaking out about the climate, and they've always structured a world against protecting themselves from the climate since day one, since they were living in caves with rocks and the wind was blowing at them, whatever. And if you go out to savannah and you spend time with people who live nomadic lives, you know that the biggest deal for them is maybe climate, and on a dodgy day, maybe lions, but always climate. But the world is brutal. Humans do brutal things. Even when they are doing the kindest things, they are often doing really brutal things. I had a journalist talking to me the other day, and he's kind of quite naively talking about how they're literally experimenting on pregnant women in northern Uganda. And I was like, but there it is. And my heart breaks about it. But at the same time, there's nothing one can do, because often the greatest kindness is also brutal. And once one accepts that that is a fact or a reality of life, one's liberated, in a sense, from being depressed by it. People are saying, oh, the world's in a terrible state. I'm like, well, actually, some terrible things are going on, but there's also still some glorious, wonderful things going on. Babies are being born, trees are budding, dogs are mating, the kids are safe. We have incredible access to incredible food and transport. It's pretty incredible as well.
Does that mean we should roll up our sleeves and not try to make the world better where there are
No,
brutal
not
things
at all.
happening?
Not at all. We've got to have a purpose. We've got to have something that we want to do. And you can make a difference. Of course you can. And we should all, I think, strive to make the world better. That's a wonderful thing. If we can do it with the respect and understanding, though, that people think differently and they have different views, and as harsh as they may be, I think it's wonderful that there are uh, gay queer people who are pushing for the freedom of people in the Middle East, and those people in the Middle East would hang, draw, and quarter them. That's the beauty of human and the contradiction of human life, that those two stories can exist simultaneously. And they're both informed by the same thing: love. Love. This is how we've always done it for thousands of years. This is how we've always done it for 500 years. And now we're going public with it, and we want to be everywhere. That's beautiful. I don't have problems with any, I don't really have problems with much. So it's not that we give up on doing things. I think that's part of having a purpose in life, is something to do, because we've got a life now where, for a lot of people, striving to stay alive isn't the primary goal every day.
Mm-hmm.
And if humans don't have something to do, they can get really messy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really good thing to have really something to do, something that one believes in and is passionate about. And it's very often connected to something that we didn't have as a child growing up. And we want to fulfill that need for others. What better gift to give life than that,
That's why I listen on
right?
sidewalks.
Yeah, that's why I would love Black people who want to find their liberation from slavery and from oppression and from the oppression of racism. Oh, I'm here for it. Women who want to meet a beautiful guy and start a wonderful family and have a career and be a, not boss lady TM, but a warrior. I'm here for that. Those are the two things that I've got to kind of offer the world, and understand the impact of migration and how to work with it and resolve it, because it's part of life. So everybody's got a thing, and everybody's thing has a reason to exist, whether we like it or not. Even the people I
I
disagree with, I'm fascinated when they take it personally. It's like, well, actually, I'm just giving you another chance to look at it differently. It's a challenge, and Africans are all about challenge. I'm going to challenge you. If you grow up as an African child, you know and understand being challenged constantly, and it can feel overwhelming, but it keeps you alive,
right, rather than just we'll all agree and everyone gets a trophy. I'm going to challenge you.
right? Yeah.
Love it. No, and I appreciate this last piece, and I'll link it to Sidewalk Talk for sure. I'm going to go all the way there. But for me, I think I don't have the systemic constellation history, but I wasn't a wanted baby, right? And so there wasn't somebody waiting at the end of that birth canal to welcome me. And honest to God, when I sit on the sidewalk, I am that smiling face at the end of the birth canal saying, "Welcome. You're wanted. I want you." And every time I sit there, sometimes I'm moved to tears to sit and be able to do that for other people. Welcome. I want you. You're wanted here. And it makes me flooded with love. I am like a neon raspberry floating around that sidewalk, just beaming, literally the kind of love that you get when you come out the canal. That's what I think people feel it too. So thanks for helping me make that connection, because it's really visceral for me right now.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. And well, you know what? Thank you for choosing to be born. You know, all
I
these
busted
cherubs
my
sitting
ass
up,
to get here.
right? We all did. All those cherubs sitting out there on clouds waiting. Oh, here's an in. Will they take me? Yay! I got an in. I mean, it's an incredible privilege. And I'm really grateful that you chose to be born and I get to meet you and hang out with and talk to you and see your beautiful face and your kooky smile, and just your energy is just phenomenal. I mean, I think I need to mainline some of it.
I do have a gift of mainlining energy to people. By the way, for those of you that aren't watching, I'm wearing a jacket that I bought while I was with Zita in Portobello Market. I'm wearing Herbie's jacket.
Oh, Hubby Mensa is great.
I'll put a link in the comments, but and then I don't know if you told me or Herbie and I figured this out, but we actually have a birthday that's one day apart. So I actually am like
Uh-huh.
just stumped by this.
You're an Aquarian.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. I love Aquarians. They got their antennas like, it's amazing. I have a sister who's an Aquarian. I don't even know where she is. No, I do know where she is, but
We don't
she's
always know where we are. We're floating around in the air.
yeah. Bringing back information from Uranus, the planet. I mean,
Both, both, both. I assure you, both. I just
it's funny. It's
I just
funny because
interviewed
I was saying
Charna. Sorry, go for it.
who?
I just
Who's
interviewed
Chana?
Charna. Charna's a trauma therapist that I live streamed with 2 days ago, and she was teaching us how to breathe out of our anus. So it's just
Oh,
fitting.
fantastic. It's funny because I was saying to myself, all right, when you talk to Tracy, you've got to stay calm and collective and be really serious. And I was like, oh, that's going to go right out of the window. Because once I sit with an air sign, my head just goes and it comes out of my mouth at the speed of lightning, and ideas are coming left, right, and center. And all the
I
Capricorn.
stayed really grounded. I was breathing through my anus this whole conversation so that we could stay really grounded. And you were just on point. It was great. Oh my gosh. All right. Oh my
Oh my
gosh, I didn't even
goodness.
see the time. Holy smokes. Well, we're at a stopping point, and we have a ritual for how we end a conversation, which feels very
Okay.
systemic constellationsy.
Okay.
Because I want you to not talk to just me now. What I want you to do is see if you can feel in your spirit and being all the thousands of listeners that have been listening on sidewalks all over the world for the last 9 years.
Oh, yeah.
And whatever words of wisdom or whatever wish you want to speak directly to those souls that have been sitting on sidewalks.
Well, first of all, my soul wants to say to all of the souls who've been sitting on sidewalk, my soul loves your soul. All our souls are connected. We are one soul, even if we don't disagree, or if we do agree or not. That's not what matters. We are one in that sense, in the true African sense of the word. We are one. We are Ubuntu. And Stay with it. Keep talking, because as long as you keep talking, you're communicating something, and someone will hear you, especially if you're on a sidewalk talk, or if you're listening to someone on a sidewalk talk. In that exchange will be incredible pearls, and they may not make sense at the time, or you may not recognize them at the time you're receiving them, but hold them and treasure them, because one day they will make sense. Ah, oh, now I see. And that's the beautiful thing. So I scatter 1,000 seeds to all of you, and may you plant each one, and may they all grow into beautiful things that blossom in your life and keep you and your loved ones safe and well.
I feel so much love for you. Thank you, dear Zita. And for everyone listening, I hope that you take that into your heart. When this goes live on the show note on the podcast, you'll see show notes to find out more about Zita. I'm flying up and I'm working with you, girl, because this was a sell job on my heart. So it's done. It's a done deal.
Okay, 20th of July, mark your diaries.
Okay, 20th of July.
That's the next workshop. No, it's going to be at the Skylight Center, and it's called Make Love Last.
Ooh, look at she's shaking. I love you. Oh my God, you are like the best human. You are the best human. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. You hang out there.